everybody, it's Robert Dunt from arttop10.com, and I'm very excited today to be chatting to Matthew Collings and Emma Biggs. Hello.
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 So guys, how have you been surviving the lockdown madness?
It hasn't been mad here. We're very isolated here anyway. We live in a village in Norfolk where nothing is. So there's no real change here. You know, the nearest shops are quite a few miles away.
Okay.
I think that's where we noticed the change mainly, of course, because of the plastic visors and the emptiness of the streets and the shops all closed and the queues, etc.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that our lockdown has been terrible. I mean, the news is terrible, but I mean, we're loving it really, haven't we?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, one of the things that I've been doing during the lockdown is sewing a banner with the names of all the people who died, NHS doctors who died, or the first ones, and that can be upsetting, actually, oddly.
It's absolutely fascinating because I saw the banner and I was thinking to myself, I would just find that incredibly hard to do, which might be a shortcoming of me. But I mean, I wondered, is it terribly emotional to do it?
Yes, it can be very emotional. It can. Today, for example, I was just listening to the radio, and there was an interview with the relatives of Adil Al-Tayyar, who was a Sudanese doctor, and and all the sort of networks and family that he supported, people he supported back in Sudan, what he had meant if some of his families had become doctors themselves, you know, what it all meant. A lot of the families were doctors, and I don't know, it is incredibly upsetting. But it also feels like some sort of reparation, I suppose, for being fortunate.
Well, I was thinking about it because it takes. How is it actually made? There's the banner behind you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Well, it's made out of.
Well, it's incomplete. I mean, you're gradually going down and down.
Yeah, it's made out of bits of bedsheet.
Oh, really?
My grandmother's bedsheet and Matt's mother's bed cover. So there are sort of, partly I suppose because that seemed like an appropriate thing, but I'm making it in little strips.
Oh, wow.
And then just sewing it in little strips.
Yeah.
And then, so there you go, there's a bit of a masking tape. The yellow masking tape, sew on top of the masking tape.
That is so cool. So you sew on the masking tape?
Sewed on top.
Oh, wow, that is absolutely wild. And then that then goes onto the banner again or further down.
Yes, it does. So there's a whole list. So, you know, so this bit will be sewed onto here. When it's finished, it'll be sewed on the bottom there, and I'll do the next person. And as I do it, I'm just going down and down and down.
It's actually a very complicated structure, and it's been approached in many different ways during the making of it.
Yeah,
it's been deconstructed and reconstructed, different elements added. It started out with materials, as Em mentioned, but it's had other things added, and it's quite almost unrecognizable now from how it started. So the structure has been found in the making, like a painting. But the content is terribly sad. I mean, it's a philosophical question as to whether you have to be sad to successfully depict sad content. The fact is, it's incredibly moving. You know, the guy who Emma mentioned was 60 years old. He had every reason to expect to live for a long, long time. But he's in the social group that is 4 times more likely to die than anyone else because of government incompetence and lying and years of driving down those institutions and undermining that section of society so they're more vulnerable.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a weird thing, and the other thing it does take you a very long time to produce it, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
Because I was thinking it feels to me the time, and especially as you've put your own kind of bed sheets into it, it's like a very personal kind of memorial in a way.
It is, yes. Yeah, but at the time, I mean, both with our paintings, those curiously take incredibly long to do, and I make mosaics, and the mosaics take a very long time. So there's a sort of element of time it's just the same as normal. It takes
Right.
What I have done, though, is given myself a sort of daily discipline of sewing a certain amount per day. Otherwise, I don't think I would, otherwise stuff would get in the way of doing it, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Everything we do, jointly or individually, takes a long time.
Yeah.
There's one project that Em set up that she's now invited me to sometimes have something to do with, where we actually produce the component parts of it relatively quickly, but it's a project that's designed to last a year. So that's like, we tell us about that, please.
Well, it's some signs. This is our studio where we are now, and hanging outside the studio on the high street is a sign, painting on cardboard, of a plant, and it's the plant and a name of a plant. And it's really, because although we live in a rural village, it is positively amazing how little people know about the flora around them. They really, really don't know at all. Okay. And I'm a bit of a sort of climate activist, and I know that the flora is important. It's part of what keeps the sort of carbon, it's a soil structure and plants, it's part of what is a carbon sink. And if you don't know what you're losing unless you know what you've got in the first place. So the idea of that is that every day we do a sign, hang it outside, it's there for 24 hours and then it comes back in. But actually sometimes it's a few more days than 24 hours.
In theory, it's a different one every day.
Yeah.
One or other of us has to do one. We invite other people to do it, but mainly it's actually Emma. So there's a piece of cardboard, it's the same size. On one side, there's a circle with a representation of a flower or plant of some kind. On the other side, the name of that plant. And it's hung outside our studio, so it's clearly visible from the street. Anyone who goes by can see it. So it's a sort of consciousness-raising exercise via art about the issues that Em just spelled out.
That sounds pretty cool. So do you like document it? So do you keep the photos of each different day?
Yes, I try to. Although I've been meaning to. I did in fact get a website, so that, I created a website, but I haven't had much time to do anything. But I mean to put all the things and make a sort of proper document of it at the end. But I haven't quite managed that yet.
It works to be their own documentation actually, because all the sheets of cardboard, all the signs are kept. One day there'll be a huge show of them.
Yeah. and has it reacted? Do you get people reacting to them outside?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Yeah, that's been quite gratifying because people have been interested in it and have asked me about the plants. And I've started doing part of this kind of graffiti chalking, so that when I hang one, I go out in the street, find one of the plants, and then write in chalk that, for example, Greater Celandine. So I'll write on the pavement, Greater Celandine, and then an arrow pointing to it, so that people know that is what that particular thing is. So, it's all a sort of information. Originally, I was planning to do workshops and things and invite kids in and show them and tell them. But of course, that's been impossible.
Yeah.
That's still
I love the arrow on the ground pointing to the plant.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And so how has it, Matthew, how's it affected your work, your solo work, you say?
Well, part of my solo work is writing, and for years now I've been supposed to be delivering a book to Thames and Hudson about contemporary painting. Oh. And I always find it difficult to get going with it, and I often leave it alone. I used to write hundreds of books every week, and I haven't been able to write this book for about 15 years. And this, I rewrote it all, and I've nearly finished it now, during the period of the lockdown, and I made it all be from the perspective of the lockdown, thinking about what could painting be when we go back to, in quotes, the normal art world, and indeed the normal world. What will art galleries be? What will the art market be? How will it affect paintings?
Absolutely.
And so actually the lockdown has been incredibly productive for me, because it's enabled me to mix ideas about painting with ideas about politics and simple descriptions about what we've been hearing every day, what we witness, what we think's going on.
Okay, that's quite interesting. So you've mixed politics and art and all these things, jumbled them up together. And wild.
That side of my work, the lockdown has been very good for. But the other side is me and Em's joint paintings, really. And as it happens, in these few months, we're always doing them to some extent, but we haven't been doing them very much. You can see half of one there.
Yeah.
That was selected actually for the Royal Academy Summer Show.
Oh, nice.
But at least it made the first stage, you know, the photographics. But of course, the whole thing's been put off now, so we don't know whenever that will be. In the last 4 months, we haven't been doing that work as intensively as we normally are doing, because we usually have a show on the way and we're usually intensively working at it. So we've just got 2 or 3 paintings knocking about the place. And then, you know, both of us do solo art. I've been doing a few sort of expressionist paintings, and putting them up on Instagram. And yeah,
because I've seen some of your solo stuff before on Facebook and things like that. It has quite a, I don't know, I'm probably gibberish, but I always feel it has a bit of a Patrick Harran-y, abstract-y sort of vibe thing to it. Or
I love that kind of art. That was always the background to my art life from when I was young. But that hasn't been something that has been my main arm of art production. I'd say the 2 main things are writing and our joint paintings.
And so just tell me how you guys do the joint paintings together. I think I've heard a little bit, but I think it would be interesting for everybody just to know how it works, the collaborative process.
Well, the simple factual nature of how we do them is easy to explain, but that is tied up with ideas that we have about why we do them and what they're for. But I mean, the simple factual thing is that Emma, you know, they're primarily about colour, and Emma conceives those colour relationships.
Okay.
And I paint them. She doesn't ever paint them, and I always paint them. But she really conceives the colour, mixes it up herself, mixes up the oil paint mixtures, tells me where to put them, and I apply them. And that's basically how they're done. You know, we draw up a very simple grid, and we fill in the areas. But neither of us has any idea what's going to happen. We only know that's going to be the type. This is going to be the size of the canvas. These are going to be the internal elements, smallish diamond shapes or largish ones. Recently, they've become sort of wonky diamonds. For a while, they were elongated. Sometimes they're standard diamonds.
Because I've seen them at London Art Fair and things like that before, and they have changed over the years. I'd say they've got more, wonky recently.
Yes.
The changes obey our joint impulse to develop and expand the ideas. You know, I think they've become not only wonky, but they've got more elements in them. They have sort of extra triangles lying alongside the main triangle, and I think that came from your desire to have more relationships in there, more colours in there. What would you say an answer to his question? How we do them? Why do we do them like that? I think we sort of know, but how would you put it? Why do we do them? I mean, we sell them, so that's good. Why do we do that and not something else?
I think it's partly because, I don't know. It's sort of difficult to give an.
They obey principles that we have. We have certain political ideas, like we think individualism is bad and competitiveness is bad. We think mutuality is good and supporting others is good. So they're community paintings, not individual subjective paintings. Because both of our subjectivities can't possibly be the main thing. In a way, there isn't a subjectivity. There's sort of group subjectivity. There's collaboration. You know, so wanting those elements to be there in a body of paintings caused us to do this kind of painting. Would you say it was like that? How would you say something different to that?
Well, I think I find it hard to explain. But I think that there's something about. I think of them as a bit metaphorical, I suppose. So that I think that they're like a sort of analogies for finding a kind of whole load of jostling differences and making some sort of structure in which jostling differences are allowed to be meaningful. And so in that sense, I think of them as kind of looking for a kind of harmony by putting together as many differences as you can possibly find, so that they can start out very sort of crudely weird and ugly, and then it's a quest to sort of wrestle them to the ground, I suppose. That's kind of, even though they look as if they're, I think people think that sort of, you know, we've all very carefully worked out exactly what goes here and what goes there beforehand. It isn't like that. Everyone is a kind of, you know, chasing a kind of puff of smoke and trying to bottle the puff of smoke as it kind of drifts wildly off somewhere.
Oh, I love it. I love that idea of the sort of controlling the chaos and sort of bringing it back into order, and the wildness of it being pulled down. And also the way you talk about it, it sounds like people used to talk about cubism. Like cubism was like, it was like a scent going around a corner. The sort of picture, that's a way of describing what it looked like. But
we all have to live with everybody else, and with everybody else's impulses and egos and drives and their reasons for being. And you don't want a structure of living with other people where you just got a few dominating everybody. You want a sort of an order that allows everyone to have a fulfilled life. And that's the way that paintings are made, really. You know, they're totally spontaneous. Once the grid is done, everything's spontaneous. So each shape of color, it obeys the outline of the shape, but the color is completely arbitrary, you know, but then you've got to make another color vibrate with that. So it gets less and less arbitrary. And that's like a social order, you know. The arbitrariness of everybody's difference is one thing, but then how are you going to get them to all be together, jostle together at the maximum of their potential of life? You know, so that's how we like to see the paintings.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the banner is overtly sort of political, and
it is,
like that. And yet the collaborative paintings are not, probably to the layman or whoever, quite so overtly political. But
no, they're not.
You guys,
whether to the layman or to an art expert, they're definitely not overt commentary paintings. You know, Emma's banners and banners that we've worked on jointly make a direct political comment, and the signs to some extent have a more political meaning than the paintings. The paintings are the most abstract thing we do. They work entirely, you know, when Em said metaphor, they work entirely by metaphor and by allegory, and their meanings are sort of once removed from reality. But they are about reality and about ideals of reality.
I think in a way that I sort of thought of abstraction, apart from the fact, I suppose, sort of being a little bit drawn to pattern making anyway. I thought of abstraction as a way of producing something which had kind of a bit of visual grip, but without sentimentality. And, or at least I certainly didn't want to introduce, I mean, there's a certain kind of abstraction which was associated, I suppose, when I was kind of young, but of thinking about kind of, I don't know, rugged masculinity, and that all seemed ridiculous and really what I kind of cared about. And then there was sort of ironized, then there was a sort of ironized way of revisiting abstraction, and that sort of didn't totally fit with what I thought, because I think I'm a bit of a sincerist rather than an ironist. Matt's much better at irony than me. But so the form that it took is sort of, you know, is a sort of form, especially when we started, I think, that seemed possibly ludicrous or possibly dryly mathematical. And I think we've just kind of gone for something that seems dryly mathematical, unsentimental, seems kind of, and to try and introduce into something that has all sorts of resistances, all sorts of reasons to resist it, something kind of a bit seductive. So I think that's an explanation, so much as I can find one.
I don't know if, you know, the minute we started collaborating, people started buying them, and we got a dealer very soon who's stuck with us ever since and is incredibly open to however we develop them. And I always wonder how it would work if we made them in a void.
Okay.
I think it would give us a certain satisfaction, but they are really intended as public works. Sometimes we've been in group shows abroad, and I remember we were in a show in Czechoslovakia once, I think it was. Was it? Anyway, and the curator said they were hermetic. And I thought, what? But yeah, they are a bit hermetic, but they're not intended as hermetic philosophical exercises. They're intended as public works because they have a sort of ordinary appeal of public things. That they have the appeal of designs or clothing design or anything in the world that's manufactured and must look nice.
Yeah.
But behind that initial resemblance to a mere design, there's a lot of pulsating, painterly ideas and sensations. So there's a sort of bland front informed by quite intense painterly experimentation. Yeah. And we do both of those for a public audience.
I think there is a real difference from design. I know that a lot of people, a lot of the time people say, oh, they would make a lovely quilt, or, some curtains.
Which we take as a compliment.
But actually, there is something about, what a design of that nature does is that it takes something relatively sort of, relatively simple, and the visual interest is created by what's done to the thing, so that it's either, if it's fabric, say, it's the fact that it's folded backwards and forwards, if it's a curtain, that gives it the kind of visual, this disruption and the visual interest and so on. And actually, I think rather than design, there's an intention to sort of structure into the work the complexities that you would find when a design has use value, so that there is a sort of equal amount of complexity and ambiguity, I suppose, so that something that seems as if it should be rigorously, tremendously simple, isn't. So you come back and so I suppose the difference would be, for example, that you could paint a sort of series, you could paint a grid and you would do one thing with it, and that would be it. I feel that the visual appeal of an absolutely simple structure runs out after a while because it becomes very, very known to you. Yeah. The idea with our paintings is to sort of structure in enough complexity for them never to be entirely immediately visibly knowable, even though you might look at one and say, oh yeah, that's a Biggs and Collings, because there's that unknowability as part of their raison d'etre or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, it's really cool. And the one behind you, it does actually feel like it is moving. It's like it is like a curtain.
Yeah. Or something. Or... Actually, that's a new sort of look that we've been working with, of a more sort of storm-tossed arrangement for the grid.
Okay.
And until now, whatever complexities there were within the grid happened within something strictly orthogonal. And now they've gone a bit more diagonal and loping and almost sort of expressionist. But,
okay. So do you ever feel like sealing things out of the collaborative things into your own solo work?
Well, that happens anyway, really.
Yeah.
I can only paint in the way that I can paint, and Emma can only arrange and generate colours in the way that she arranged and generate colours. It's just that in the medium of oil paint is different to Emma's main medium, which is mosaic making.
Okay. I hadn't, because they've got an element of mosaic vibe to them as well, haven't they?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And their format comes very much from Emma's many years of experience of mosaicing. They're sort of oil painting translations of her whole life of mosaics.
Okay. So
both bring things from our solo endeavours into this joint activity. But not in a literal sense, like the paintings don't have a section of mosaic in them, or a section of or some ironic writing stuck in them by me, or art criticism in them. but in a more subtle sense, that the paintings do compress lots of things that we are both individually interested in.
It's really cool. So you never, it's a stupid question, but you never just think, oh, those are lovely colours she's mixed up, I'm just going to use them on my own picture.
Oh God, you know, I do. I think that all the time. No, I would love to, because I don't have that sensibility that I can appreciate it, but I can't do it, and that's a subtle difference that many people don't realise, that we all, in a way, appreciate the subtleties of a Cézanne, but none of us could really do that, you know. But it's assumed that, you know, if you know it, then you could do it. But I mean, I'd love to force them to paint my paintings, actually.
Oh, cool.
To give me all the colours to my paintings. It doesn't work like that. I mean, I often do get her to write my books. I'm always having. I can always sort of put notions together swiftly, but I can't always think of the notions, and I'm always kind of torturing her and saying, "Well, what's the difference between Lynette Yadom-Boakye and Frank Auerbach?" Even though I know the difference, I want to hear someone else put it into words, and then I can use those words and do something with them. You know? I mean, creativity is a funny thing. You know, some of it is simple, and a child could do it. And some of it is incredibly complex and just has to do with overcoming neuroses and barriers, you know, and trying to become like a child.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. That's an interesting description of criticism, actually. I'm also fascinated, actually, by the way you talk. Is almost like we're almost preset to paint in a certain way. Like you feel you have a preset way you produce pictures. It's almost like, I mean, do you feel that's something you've learned about yourself, or do you just feel it was always that way?
I don't know. That is a good question, I suppose. We've been painting together for 20 years. And so when we do our collaborative paintings, I paint in that way. I'm aware that it isn't the way I painted when I was 15 or when I was 20 at art school, or when I was in my 30s before I met Anne, and I was still painting. I'm aware that it's different because it's constrained by the joint nature of this set of works. But I still make marks in the same way and clean the brush in the same way and apply paint in the same way and have the same sort of instinctive sense of an edge, or making an edge be dramatic, you know, and making a plane seem believable. I think I don't know if that, I think that stuff is a kind of instinct that grew up over years of doing it. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question really.
Oh no, I just think it's quite interesting that, I mean, I suppose I would always like that kind of Patrick Harran thing, but then I drift in and out of different kind of things that's sometimes representational, sometimes abstract. I find it hard to pin myself down to a certain kind of thing if I paint. It's sort of, but then I come back to things that seem to have more value than others at the end of the day. But
I think I always liked Patrick Harran, or admired or believed that he was a real thing, as a secret pleasure. Because he was such an out of fashion character all my life. And I don't think people coming to art for the first time recently who might go to a show of his would know that he simply was beyond the pale, you know, for decades. And that kind of painting was beyond the pale. And even when it had currency, it was considered a bit of a footnote to American art.
Yeah.
You know, there are all sorts of embarrassments connected to Patrick Harran and John Hoyland and those normal, etc.
Yeah, no, of course.
But I like all those, and I like the stream of painting generally that connects to, which one could say is classic modernism, a sort of 1950s type of art, which to me seems to summarize a lot of aspects of the whole history of art. So that seems to be what it wants to do. It wants to summarize the history of art and compress aspects of the history of art into a circle, or the way a circle sits in a rectangle. You know,
it's quite interesting. And so, I mean, one of the fascinating things talking to you is that, like the plants outside you put outside, the banners, the paintings, it all has quite a political ethos. It's almost like everything you do runs on the same kind of vein.
Well, we're both, quite politically involved. I'm still in the Labour Party, but I resigned because I don't like where it's going now. But, we think about politics all the time. It's incredibly stimulating for us. We have definite political aims and beliefs. But we're also artists, and we appreciate art that doesn't have any political meaning.
Yeah.
And it's just that art is such a rich, painting and mosaicing and weaving and all these things that we do, even writing about art, is such a sort of rich tool for expressing ideas about life as it seems to you.
That's really interesting, actually.
That politics just naturally can be integrated into it, and sometimes, as we've observed in this interview, it's overt. Its presence is overt, and sometimes it's a sort of an invisible presence, but it is there. It's very meaningful to us. We think our paintings have a political meaning, but it's not like when we choose purple and put it next to brown, we think it's a political decision. We think the whole structure of the work has political implications. Yeah. The whole structure of how we do it, why we do it, what we wanted to do. We think that's democratic painting.
And do you think, because the art world is I certainly find it a weird thing with all the huge amounts of money and everything. Do you think the whole lockdown thing, the virus thing, do you think it'll bring people back to a kind of art that affects them more deeply in a more simple fashion? Or do you think there'll be no change at all? It'll rumble on in its strange way?
In order to want a type of art that affects you in a deep fashion, you'd have to be conditioned in that direction. You'd have to have expectations, cultural expectations. And they don't exist in our culture. That's not what, we have a multiple pathway type of art where anything could happen.
Yeah. And
it's explained in any way, truthfully or falsely. The only thing that really links everything is money and the money culture. So if money goes down, which it has already gone, and if we have to recover from that going down, then everything in society is going to change, and that will have an effect on art. But it can't be imagined at this point what that effect will be. Of course, one always wants the effect to be. Of course, one always wants art to have more integrity, or we feel it more deeply. But those are sort of cliches, really, that just mean we want art to be good. And they don't really, you can't make art out of those cliches and those ideals. Art is really made out of the tangible facts of life, and the traditions of art. You somehow, in your own moment, you bring those two together. And at the moment, as I say, a sort of ideal art where things are sincere instead of glib and ironic and meaningless, that sensibility is not out there. We pay lip service to it, but it's not really there. Maybe it wasn't even there in the 1950s. We might choose to idealize. Maybe it wasn't even there with Van Gogh. Van Gogh was probably a more complicated character than we like to think. But all I'm saying is that inevitably there will be a change to how art gets seen and therefore how it's made, because we've been living in a hard-driven money culture for 40 years.
I think something else as well. I think that the outbreak of coronavirus was probably sort of caused by our encroachment into the natural world, and that those things and the implications of what sort of climate change is going to bring to us are going to bring we're going to have to bring probably a slightly different sort of society. And I would say the art world, like everything else about our current world, runs on the fossil fuel industry, really. Yeah. It runs in terms of art fairs, biennales, in terms of the wealth, in terms of the patronage of huge galleries and donations and so on. And I sort of suppose that the pandemic is a kind of, it's a kind of, is it called an augury, and like a kind of warning of things to come. It's not, I don't think of the pandemic as being an end point from which there'll be a recovery and a better, lovelier world. I think of it as being sort of the beginning of a series of waves that'll come crashing, but won't necessarily do something. I mean, I think that the terriblenesses of what are likely to come won't necessarily be only wholly terrible. I think that they could bring positive and good things.
Yeah, I love that sort of sense of it as like a Greek muse arriving with the augury to bring this sense of vastness.
Yeah. Well, we are living through that. Yeah. I mean, as we said at the beginning, for us, it's been this strange contrast of lovely isolation and beauty of the weather getting nicer and the garden and living in the countryside and everything. The contrast of that with the horror story that Emma's insisting on with that banner, and the ongoing rising horror of all the sort of incompetence and lies of the government, and the idea that the same lies and incompetence that sent old people who contracted the virus into care homes so that the other patients there and their carers all died, as well as the poor old people sent there. The same incompetence is now proposing to send children back to school with all the same lies and pretense and the pretending that we're following science, when we know that the science is very weird. A lot of those scientists are corrupt people who serve the government's line.
Yeah.
So it's a time of hope about change, but it is a really terrible sort of time of melancholic, absolute sort of crushing disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it is. It's a weird time. I've loved chatting to you guys. But would it be cheeky? Is there any way we could have a little look at the studio any further? I'm sure some people would be amazed, unless there's sort of secret things lurking.
There's not an awful lot going on in this room at the moment, other than what you're seeing, which you could see wider. But Emma's embarked on a big mosaic in her mosaic. We have different studios throughout the house.
Okay, cool.
Emma's got a mosaic going. We've got a couple of paintings that are halfway through or nearly done. I'll point the screen a bit at them.
Yeah, cool, because people love to see a bit of that, and they actually love seeing things like the palette and the brushes or any of the actual little things that you don't normally see.
Well, we just tidied all that up, actually.
So here you are, you're looking around.
Oh, very cool.
There's a painting on the wall there. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting actually, because it really shows you how it builds up.
That's right, and here's one which is just beginning.
Okay. Oh, nice. So you work on quite a few at the same time.
Yeah. And then here's...
Show them more close up of the seasick.
There's a nice little combination of brushes and...
No, that's cool stuff.
Showing the banner close up, that's
right. Oh, the banner, yeah, you can look at that. Can you see that?
These bits are my mum's bedspread.
Yeah.
She died in 2007.
Okay.
This is an old sheet of M. This is spray. This is sewn.
Spray. And you can see on the ground the spray where I've sprayed on the studio floor. Here
That's a painting called "The Earth is filled with violence." That's a quote that comes from Genesis. All our paintings are named after quotes from Genesis.
Here we are. This is both Matt and I are set up here to do the signs. And
this one, yeah. So what are those little sort of acrylic or watercolor paints?
Acrylic, yeah. So our painting, we only ever paint with oil paint, but here there's
the signs.
There's the sign.
Which oil paints do you guys use? Do you have a particular brand you go for?
Well, a combination of Michael Harding and Old Holland mostly.
Okay.
Here's the sign hanging out on the street. That's one of Matt's signs there.
What's that plant called?
Can you see it? It's called garlic mustard. No. Can you see that through the?
Yeah, the sign is absolutely fantastic. That's wonderful. I love the way it's hanging out there. I didn't realise it would hang out so perfectly, sort of, perpendicular to the building.
Yeah, I think it's the shop. It used to be a shop. This particular room was a shop. So so it goes on what would have been the shop sign, I guess.
Oh man, that's so cool.
Pallets.
Tape.
Oh, I love the pallets. Oh wow, can we see the pallets again? They're really cool.
There you go.
I love it. So look, do you wash the brushes every day, or you just leave them?
No. Look at these. They've been there for about a year.
Oh, good. That's good. That's what I do. Just glad it's not just me.
Disgraceful. Students, don't do this.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's much easier to do that.
What else?
Here's masking tape.
Oh yeah, masking tape.
Yeah, which is obviously, yeah.
I don't always use tape. We make those edges in all sorts of different ways. Do you see that tape?
Yeah, I can see the masking tape, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so cool. So wait, so you sometimes mask it and sometimes just use a different method?
Yeah, sometimes do it by freehand, sometimes paint across bits of paper.
Nice.
All sorts of different methods to do with the paint being wet.
Okay.
Whether it's wet or dry will determine how I do the edit.
Oh, I see, of course. Yeah, oh, that's really interesting, actually.
This is the sort of, this is where we mix the paints.
Oh, right, that's quite interesting. So, yeah, so, because one of you's mixing and the others are always, they'd all be a little home for it.
Emma's standing there at the table mixing paint all day on pallets. And I'm applying it, and then she's saying, try that, and then do that. So that's her corner, and then I'm over against the wall painting.
That's really cool. I hadn't actually realised the point that it actually allows Emma just to concentrate on the colour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else getting in your way. That's really cool. Right, I better let you guys go. I've absolutely loved chatting. Emma, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I love it.
Bye.
Okay, thank you so much, guys.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bomb buckler.